Commissioner Hanson, can you hear us?
Yes, I
Oh,
can
we can hear
now.
you.
Yes,
Fabulous.
great. Can you see me?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
All right, it's now 11:30. I'm going to go ahead and kick off our pre-commission agenda. I don't have anything to share today, but do we have any housekeeping items? I do have a consent agenda, but any questions on the agenda?
Madam President, I do have a few questions on the consent agenda. So when we have an opportunity, I'd like to address those.
All right, sounds good. Anybody else? Oh. Commissioner Goldthorpe?
I will have one.
Okay. So not knowing what your questions are about, but I think staff is requesting that we remand item number 3 on the consent agenda back to staff indefinitely for now, because that's just not quite ready yet. So I think that's the only item that I have for the consent agenda, but Commissioner McKinney, do you want to fire off your questions?
Yes, thank you. Director, let me, items 2, 3, and 4, and of course, item 4 was just moved, but on the consent agenda, these all relate to the Meeker, the new headquarters building improvements and so on. First question I have is this. I'm wondering if someone on staff, I'd like to get a running total of where we stand on the costs and the current estimate for the total costs for getting that building ready. In part because, of course, we had initial estimates and we've kind of gone beyond that, and I'd like to know where we are and where we're going. For example, item 2 is the architect, I believe, who's going to design the improvements. Item 3 is the construction manager who's going to manage the improvements, but it doesn't look like that's not the actual construction amount for these improvements, is it?
Correct.
This is just for the design and the management of doing them. So it'd be nice to have an estimate of that along with a running total. You know, we spent 16 point something million for the premises. We've already seen some items come before us previously on partitions for the new headquarters and other things. So I'd like to see kind of how things are stacking up, where things are adding up, and where we're likely going to end up. Because it looks like, you know, are we going to be 2 or 3 million over our initial estimate of 20-ish, or are we going to be 5 million over that? I'd like to know where things are headed. And on item number 4, the workstations, just was it last week that we dealt with the results of the auction for the surplus property at the new building, and included in that was something like $470,000, or at least estimated value of workstations that we would be removing there. And my question is this: in view of the apparent, you know, the intent to purchase over $800,000 worth of new workstations, I guess the question that comes to my mind, were none of the workstations, existing workstations there, suitable for use, continued use by any of our personnel? And if not, why not? What are the reasons why absolutely none of them were usable? Because it strikes me that potentially some of them could have been. I'd like to get a little more detail on that if I could. So let me stop there and let you answer any of that if you can.
Yeah, Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, we do have, as part of the director's report, a brief update on the Meeker site. Roughly, just rough numbers right now, we're at about $4 million with the items that are on the agenda today, which is pretty close to where we started. That puts us right around 20 million total, maybe 20 million and a half total right now. We will have some construction costs that will come in, but we have to get the architectural work done for the construction drawings to really get a good idea of what that's going to be finalized. We still believe we're within the numbers that were approved in the budget, which was about 7.5 million or 750,000 this year. 4 million next year and 1 million the following year. So that's about under 6 million. Right now, that's where we're looking. We still need to work through the final area there, but we're still well under the appraised value of the building, which was 27 million. We may be closer to 22 million, 23 million overall for the final work there. Regarding the furniture that was left there are some workstations that were not included in the auction that we are looking to reuse some or all components of those. So there were some things there. We're also looking to reuse the workstations that were purchased for Orchard not many years ago. So we are looking to reuse furniture that we have. The offices will be furnished based on what we have here in the building. These are the workstations that are out in the open areas that we're working to purchase at this point in time, and just want to standardize those so all staff has the same thing. As we move into a little bit more of an open environment, I want to make sure that that's appropriate for all users that way. So we are reusing though where for areas that are not in that open environment. There's some suites and other things that are for like our accounting or IT that we're going to be looking to reuse some of the materials that are there or what we have at Orchard as well.
Okay, well, then I guess it would be helpful if someone could give to me, like, I'd like to know how many workstations are we using that were already there versus how many new ones that we're purchasing. The tabulation that was in the documentation for the staff report, it listed individual elements of the workstations. And so it's hard to come up with a total number of workstations because they were, we have this many parts and several parts make one workstation. If somebody could tell me, how many existing ones are we able to reuse and how many new ones we're having to buy, that would be helpful on that end. So thank you on that. Let me just go to two other quick questions. The item number 7, the grounds maintenance services bid results in consideration. I saw all the information, but it wasn't explicitly stated who the successful bidder was. It looked like it was Lawn Company, but I just wanted to clarify that because I was uncertain after I read that.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. And then the snow blower piggyback, give me some details on this piece of equipment. What type of snow blower is it? Where will it be used? What's its purpose?
Thank you. Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, our existing snow blowers over 20 years old at this point in time. This is used. The equipment helps lift it and put it into a loader to carry it away. So it's in situations for extremely heavy snow where we need to not just move the snow to the side, but actually remove the snow completely. So that's what its primary use is for. There are some roads that we clear that are more mountainous, that it gets a little bit challenging to just plow those. So that's one of the main uses, but we also can have it in case of extremely heavy snow when we need to pick up and remove snow.
Okay. How many snow blowers of this type do we have?
I believe just the one.
Just the one. So
Just the one.
replacing
So we're
one.
just replacing the.
So this is like the type of thing that was used during Snowmageddon to very slowly haul away the snow.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Goldthorpe.
Two things. One has to do with the workstations. Having been in that facility before we bought it, when it was still being used, correct me if I'm wrong, most of what we call workstations, the rest of the world calls cubicles. And we don't house our people in cubicles, correct? Those little 3-foot wide jobs with a headset and have to learn how to speak Pakistani or something.
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, we don't, it's not a call center. We're not putting people into that type of situation. While the workstations we're talking about is a form of a cubicle, it's more of an open desk forum where people are in this same room, but they're not on top of each other like what was existing in the
before.
building.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
I think to your point, Commissioner Goldthorpe, it's a very different use. Right.
Well, it's not just a very different use, it's a very different size too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Also about the, grounds maintenance. I, unfortunately don't have a legal degree, so I was not able to pull out who the, winner was of that bid. And so Dean Cooper told me who it was. But my wife had an interesting suggestion because both she and I have noticed over the past year or two that, that there were quite a few weeds coming up in our park and rides, like waist high. And I'm wondering if there's any way that, and I know in all the material we had here to read, there were questions asked about if the weeds are supposed to be gone from the park and rides. And Dean said, yes, no weeds. Well, that was there before too. Perhaps a sign in the park and rides say the landscaping is proudly being taken care of by Lawn Co. Any complaints, please call this number. I probably need a legal opinion whether or not we can do something like that, but I think that might help to establish a little bit more pride of ownership of the people that are taking care of our facilities.
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, great suggestion. We can definitely look at that. This is the award this year is a different company than has maintained our facilities for a number of years. So we also look forward to seeing their excellent service moving forward.
Thanks.
Commissioner Hanson, do you have any questions before we turn it over to Director Head?
No, nothing. Thanks.
Okay.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, commissioners, for the opportunity today to present to you the great work staff has been doing over the last week and items that are up and coming. As mentioned, we will have a brief report from our project manager on Meeker, just to keep you in the loop, since there are a number of items on the agenda. We wanted to give you an update on where we are with that. But really, we want to emphasize and highlight today a very exciting event that occurred this last Saturday. ACHD held its 22nd annual charity golf tournament. This is an event where staff works with the community to raise funds. By far, this was the most successful charity event we've held. About $80,000 more than the last prior high. So we're really excited to be able to contribute $310,000 to Idaho military families. These are all donations. These are not public dollars that are contributing here. These are donations from a number of entities, sponsors of the event, and it was a really exciting and successful day, both leading up to and that day. So many kudos to staff. We will have the charities here. It was the Idaho Military Reserve and Guard and Reserve Family Support Fund, as well as the Operation Warm Heart, who will be the main recipients here. We also get some support from the BSU golf team, who come and are auctioned off, and extremely successful this year. Just in that auction alone was over $40,000 for the 10 teams that were participating. So super exciting, and we'll be able to, we split those funds with them and help their program as well. So it's a pretty exciting event, and it was a great day. So thanks to staff who put that on. And we will have them here for the commission to give the actual checks in the near future. It's always exciting to report on the work that staff is doing to build together, build safe, and build more. And we have some really exciting things to share with you today. The first, if you remember this from a few weeks back, as school was starting, we had some concerns with regards to the access to Owyhee High School. The ACHD had worked hard before that school opened to install an interim signal at the intersection of Ustick and McDermott, which is approximately where that stop sign is there at the bottom, or the red dot is there at the bottom of the screen. During the construction of State Highway 16, that had been converted to an all-way stop. We had some concerns with how that was going to impact the students accessing the school. Well, first of all, the good news is it hasn't been apocalyptic, but we get reports that it is challenging, definitely, and does impact the students. Staff has worked with ITD, and ITD today will be installing a signal at that location, getting it back open to the condition that we had before. We're appreciative of their hard work, but also appreciative of staff and the work that they've done to work with the state to get that moving forward and make sure that that's properly addressed. We also wanted to report on, we've received a number of communications from our city partners. Not all of them are focused on this, but a number of them are focused on the fiber to home access and exploring and making sure that we get fiber to home. One of the things that we've heard a lot from the companies that do this is the use of micro trenching as a methodology for installation is definitely important. This reduces the amount of depth. We see some positives in this and the impact that this has in the impact to the public. Our typical trenching requirements is that it be about 36 feet and a few feet wide in order to get that depth. This can be done with a machine and brings in that fiber at much smaller depths. Christy Little is working on this process to identify the best way to bring it forward, to either pilot or to work on allowing this more openly in the ACHD system. But I just wanted to highlight the ways the team is working together. One of our team members, Miss Diane Bevins, is going to be visiting Pocatello this weekend. Pocatello is doing this already. She just has a personal event there, but has agreed to use some of that to go and visit the site and make sure how this is working there and give us some good feedback. So I just love seeing how the team works together to make sure that we have the best information to do the right thing all the time, and just wanted to highlight that that extraordinary effort there.
Mr. Goldthorpe.
Yes, Ryan, concerning the micro trenching, this picture that looks really cool and has a nice piece of equipment there. It looks like it's tunneling through asphalt. And if I remember our last conversations here in meetings, the question was asked if we were going to be allowing for cuts in our asphalt, and the answer was no. So I hope that's still the answer, because I know that when this sort of engineering happens, the water gets in and the road degrades a lot faster.
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at how this is working there. The prior work that we had been doing, we had done a pilot project with Crown Castle and found it to be a pretty positive experience. Unfortunately, Crown Castle and their parent company has decided not to fund further work in Idaho. And so they have moved out. And we're working to restore those roads since that service is not going to continue in that way. With this is a change that would allow a cut. We're looking at making sure that we have the right specifications so that if it is allowed and we do proceed in this way, that we make sure that we have good requirements in place to make sure the road's in a good situation and doesn't expose us to more damage down the road.
So did Crown Castle leave with us holding the bag for any remediation costs to our?
No, Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, we're working with them, and they have, in good faith, offered to do whatever remediation we want them to do. And so at their expense.
Okay, thank you.
In the realm of build safe, I just wanted to touch on some work staff has been doing as part of our safety rapid projects. This is the intersection of Webb and Pine. This was just completed this last week. It's not the first of these locations we've done this at. Current practice for roundabouts would have us install rectangular rapid flashing beacons at each of the crossings. A number of roundabouts were built before that was the standard. And so staff has been working to go back and retrofit those to include these types of crossings and make sure that we have the best and safest environment there for all people to operate in. And so just wanted to, this is one of many that we're working on. I think there's probably about 10 or so that on the total list. But that we're working on going back and retrofitting to do this, and just wanted to highlight the success of another good project completed. Not to give too many kudos to Diane, but she was out there and she did some of the grout work. We've been trying as an executive team to go out with our staff, and she was out there doing some grout work on the basis of these. So it's kind of fun to get out in the field and see what the hard work our team does. So.
No photo op of Diane doing the grout work?
Next time, take Steve.
Over the last number of months, we've been talking with the commission on the intersection of Linder and Hatchery. This has been an area, if you recall, the state working on Eagle Island and the challenges we've had with the added traffic there. But we do recognize that overall that there is some challenge with the amount of traffic on Linder on a regular basis. Staff has taken a look at this and has come back and said that we believe that we can extend the two-way center turn lane to the south of that intersection for a pretty reasonable cost, actually less than we would have paid if we kept doing the flagging approach there. That we have the right of way and we're able to extend that. We're hoping to get that done before the asphalt plants close this year. So we're pretty excited to be able to make that safety improvement at that location. We've heard a lot of feedback on this topic, and it is a growing challenge. And so having that left turn or that center turn lane will allow people to turn just across the one lane of Linder and not trying to shoot the gap between traffic coming both ways. And we definitely believe that's a positive thing. So we're working on that.
Commissioner McKinney.
Director, so just to clarify then, so what we're doing is essentially extending south from that intersection. We're widening the pavement a certain amount and then spreading the lane edge stripes so that we can put that third lane through the center for a couple 100 feet, something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
We're excited that we found a solution that worked and that we had the right of way. We were willing to go through the process to buy right of way, but that definitely would have been a much longer process to be successful. So excited to report that we found a solution. Staff is always so good at continuing to look for options to make things better. Oh, we also wanted to celebrate with you all today the completion of the Garden Street project. We have now reached substantial completion. This project was originally a request from the school district. They really were concerned about the students walking on Garden Street and that being an access route to schools. And that was the original driver behind this project. But in looking at it and what we could do there, we also saw it as an opportunity to connect bikeways. This ends at the north end at the green belt, so it's an important project that way. We were able to install speed management techniques there with there's some speed cushions as well as curb extensions there. It's has not been a project without its challenges. But definitely we're excited to be able to celebrate and have made this impact on a collector roadway here on the bench. With that, I'm going to step aside for a few moments and have Amber Morales, who's our project manager, overseeing the Meeker project. She's doing incredible work supporting Jennifer and her team on this big move. And just give her the opportunity to give you a brief update.
Welcome, Amber.
Hello, President Pickering and the commission. So I have been loaned to the chief of staff to help with Meeker. So we had 3 agenda items and we are now down to 2. So I'll see you again next week. But I'm really here to answer those questions that you may have related to those items. I thought this would be the best time to do that. So I know you had workstation questions, like I'm your gal.
Well, I guess, thank you. I think, I feel like Director had answered them pretty well, but do
Okay.
you have anything to add to what he said?
Well, these are 2 crucial items that you have on the agenda, and that'll really help with those following questions that you had, Commissioner Pickering or McKinney. So basically, I need the CSHQA contract to get us to those construction docks. And the city I've had multiple conversations with the city, and they've actually been really wonderful. And our phased approach, that is why the contract is set up the way it is. If you look in the addenda, but we're on track. So this helps keep me there with these being approved now so I can get to the city in time. So we can get our orchard people moved, and my goal is January. That allows the facilities team to have February to clean us out all the way. Because not only do we need to have our humans out by February, we need all of our stuff. So that will give our other staff members the opportunity to remove the workstations that we're utilizing in the other phased areas, make sure that we're cleaning our orchard facility, so we're leaving it in good condition when we're gone, because we are good stewards and things like that. So these are just to help keep me on track. Yeah,
Thanks,
do you
Amber.
have anything else?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, super important work.
Okay, great. Thank you, Commission. Good.
Yes, and thank you, Amber. Amber has really taken this by the horns and is really focused on making sure that we can be out and before our lease is up of that orchard site. And so that's extremely important. We believe that we don't want to extend that in any way, shape, or form just because we now have this new building and this opportunity to use it fully. Last, just wanted to bring up a few items that are coming up. Today, you will have a work session on the speed management policy. We're excited to bring this back for further discussion with you all. Really today, we just want to make sure that we are on the right track. The goal of this is to have this policy updated by the end of the year. With the number of meetings we have, it's aggressive, but we believe that that's a possible thing that we can accomplish. Tomorrow we have a lot of things going on. We do have a pedestrian advisory group meeting. We are going to celebrate the wrap up of the chip seal season. It's a good opportunity to thank the team for all the hard work they do. It's definitely been a hard year. And as we worked through this, and it maybe didn't make as much progress, but the team has worked extremely hard, and it's important for us to tell them thank you. And then we will be celebrating with Jennifer Berenger tomorrow night as she receives one of the Idaho Business Review Women of the Year awards. Next week, we do have the Integrated 5-Year Work Plan adoption hearing. That's an important milestone in each year, and we're excited to bring that for you. The following day will be a walk by our pedestrian advisory group at Colon Overland. There's the time there. If you're interested in attending, please let Stacy know, just so we can make sure it's fully noticed properly. And then always an exciting time in the year, we do have our employee appreciation breakfast coming up on October 8th. It's a fun event. The staff really appreciates the extra effort. The executive team cooks. I'll say it's really good. I can say that because I'm part of the team cooking. So, but I think the staff really does appreciate it, and they keep coming back. So with that, Commission will stand for any questions.
Thanks, Ryan. We've got just a minute and a half left before we get started. So thank you. We'll be at ease until then. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 12 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone that's online and in person. Please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The first order of business is to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. The next order of business is to adopt the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered routine and are action items unless otherwise noted. The consent agenda is enacted by one motion. There is no separate discussion on items on the consent agenda. If a commissioner or citizen would like, they may request any item be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. We do not have a request, but I just want to remind folks that we want to remand item number 3, back 3.
4,
Three.
Three.
3.
Back to staff indefinitely. Glad I clarified that. Back to staff indefinitely. So with that, commissioners, is there a motion?
Madam President,
Commissioner McKinney.
I move that we, first, let me thank the staff for giving us the additional information on the consent agenda. That's very helpful. I move that we remand item number 3 from the consent agenda to staff indefinitely, and that we approve the remaining items on the consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I would echo Commissioner McKinney's points too. And I think if it makes sense, Amber, the more that you can come and give us updates, the better, but you don't need to come up. Yeah, that'd be great. So with that, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, well, we have a really fun and exciting item on our regular agenda today. It's the presentation of our ACHD team for National Equipment Rodeo. And Lloyd, you're in the hot seat.
Yes. Afternoon, commissioners. For the record, Lloyd Carnegie, maintenance manager here at ACHD. It is a pleasure for me to be up here to honor some of our amazing operators here in our operations department. If you recall, back in April, we had our annual ACHD Equipment Rodeo, lots of fun. And we came back with some of our champion winners. And today we are here to honor them before they leave for the Nationals next week, where they're going to represent ACHD on the national level. So we have some jackets that we are honoring them with. And then as we present the jackets, we're going to have them stand up here and then have a photo opportunity with the commissioners as well. So for our truck course team, our winners were J.R. Grasmick and Brandon Kraut. You guys want to come up? For our grader course, it was Greg Gallagher. For our skid steer course, it was Eric Lopez, which is unfortunately was not able to be here today. But again, round of applause. For our loader course, it was Adam. And then every year we do hold a raffle draw, and our winner this year was Maxwell Jameson. Unfortunately, he's also not able to be here today, but again, round of applause for him. With that, I'd like to give an opportunity for the commission to come forward.
Congratulations.
They do have their instructions that they have to beat ITD, right?
Yes,
Okay.
we're taking back the title.
I'll kind of get a couple in here with the commissioners, and then if you guys can meet us outside too, they'll get a few of the winners outside.
And looks like Lloyd is on his way out. Anything else on this item? Oh, there you are, Lloyd. Okay, couldn't tell. Okay. All right, well then I'll move things over to discussion items and public communications. Is there anyone that would like to address the commission at this time? Sir, would you like to address the commission? Yeah, come on up. You've got, just state your name and address, and then you've got 3 minutes.
8341
And
West,
starting right at the mic. There you go.
Jeff Iverson. I live on 8341 West Bloomfield Drive. I'm here basically, we've had a problem on our street since the day it was built. We are a low traffic, moderate residential street that really never had a problem until they put Milwaukee through. We had Capitol High School students that would come down Christine to get through, bypass over to Camden and such like that. That was okay. My dad used to buy jalopy cars to park in front of our home because cars would come around the corner so fast they'd run up on our yard and tear out our grass. I've had 5 vehicles totaled in front of that house parked out on the street. I have watched that street turn into absolute hell. My neighbors of 48 years were killed about 3 years ago, the Gores, because of some erratic driver. We need to have something done there. We had an engineer that used to work for a CHD do his own study on it. He said, his exact words were, "You have a serious problem and it's only going to get worse if you don't do something about it." He told me that we fall into the criteria for a cul-de-sac, which, and my guesstimation, I'm not an expert, but that's about the only way you're gonna curtail or reduce this traffic, because my camera picks up about average 188 cars a day. And school buses are going down my street at 35 miles an hour. Cars are on the average of 29 miles an hour. And it's scary. I mean, it really is something that this bulb out crap. The young lady that was speaking a couple weeks ago about Bloomfield Drive, about bicyclists, there might be 3 bikes that go down our street a day, if that. There's not a lot of bike traffic. There's a few pedestrians. That's about it. It's mostly car traffic. If you put a concrete thing out on Milwaukee, it's going to make it inconvenient for us people that live on Bloomfield Drive to try to get out there. You know, we have to go the other way. But, and then she mentioned about Camden Drive, which is a street that tails off of our street. Well, what's happening now is when the lights backed up, people will go down Camden or down the other street to get further down so they can pull out onto Milwaukee, if that makes sense, because the traffic from the light, they can't get off Bloomfield Drive. So now they're cruising down that street. So they're using both streets. And I understand Wilmington Drive even, it's just become a very dangerous spot. And we really like to, and I'm speaking on behalf of all the neighbors on that street, we would like to see something done, please, before somebody else gets hurt and killed.
Thanks, Mr.
Thank
it's
you.
Mr. Iverson, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, I believe we received a letter from, was it from you?
Yes, you did, probably 2 or 3 of them. John Watson,
Yeah.
I've been in contact with him. The only reason I haven't contacted you is because when I spoke with Mr. Watson a year or so ago, he phoned me up to tell me that we're part of a project, a 5-year plan, and it looks like they're going to turn your street into cul-de-sac. When I happened to catch your meeting online a few weeks ago, a young lady was talking about Bloomfield Drive, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. What she said is incorrect. There's a bike traffic. She said she talked to multiple bicyclists who are, yay, we're going to have a bike route down through there. Like I said, there might be 3 to 5 bikes a day that go down our street, if that. So it's all car traffic, and it's ridiculous.
Well, I want to say thank you for coming, because that's been on my radar. And I remember when the Gores were hit right there at that
Yeah,
intersection. And yeah, so I
Guys lived
totally
for 48
see.
years without
Yeah.
getting killed.
I know, it's horrific. So I think, well, we can't take any official action
Right.
from you coming today, but just want you to know, like, I will explore where are we at in that process, because it definitely needs some help. And
It does.
so,
I had a gun
yeah.
pulled on me just last year. I yelled at a kid to slow down. And before I could get out of my car, he was up in my window like this, "You want some of this?" I mean, I lived there as a kid. I grew up there. I just recently moved back, but I've never in my life had that happen to me. I mean, on my own street, in my own driveway. So that's how bad it's become. So thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Iverson. Okay. Is there anyone online, Miss Stacy?
Nope,
Okay.
we are good.
All right. Well, with that, let's move into our post-commission agenda. Our work session today is on speed management. Mr. Justin Lucas, welcome. Oh, yeah, whoops. Meeting is adjourned. Sorry, skipped that step.
Well, Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, Justin Lucas, the Chief of Operations and Infrastructure here at the Highway District. Timely public feedback we received certainly relates to the topic that we are discussing today. It was a little over a year ago that the commission first looked into the speed management or traffic calming policy here at the Highway District. There was some work done and some work, I think it was one work session and a few things shared with the commission back then. We've had it on our radar to bring it back, and that is the purpose of this work session today, is kind of re-engage the commission on that conversation, seek your direction, and hopefully some consensus on how to move forward on a potential policy update or series of policy updates on this topic specifically. That being said, I felt it was important to kind of set the table on what are we talking about when we talk about speed management. Those words, speed management, aren't typical within ACHD policy. We have used the word traffic calming or speed kind of traffic mitigation as words within our policy. Speed management really is a broad topic, not only at ACHD, but across the country and certainly at the federal level. The idea is that you take a systematic approach to controlling and regulating vehicle speeds on roadways. Reduced speeds and appropriate speeds for the context are certainly more safe, and they do reduce the risk and severity of accidents for all users. And ensuring that vehicles travel at speeds that are appropriate for the road conditions and surrounding environment is really one of the foundational principles of the safe systems approach, which is something that has been promoted and designed by FHWA at the federal level. Safe systems has multiple elements. You can kind of see the pie chart there, but safer speeds is one of the key elements within the safe systems approach. And this approach is not formally adopted by ACHD, but it is a guide that we look at and review as we look at projects. Anything adopted or kind of put out at the federal level becomes kind of a best practice in the transportation field. So that being said, I wanted to talk a little bit about speed management at ACHD. There's really three different kind of categories that we would like to discuss today. Certainly at any time, please stop me, pause, ask questions as I walk through this. This is staff's attempt to kind of frame the conversation, but we're here, as with any policy discussion, to take feedback from the commission. The first one I want to mention is a very specific policy at ACHD. It's our residential traffic management or traffic calming policy. It's 5104.3. This is the policy that really deals with what ACHD does in the situations that you just heard. There's a citizen with a concern. What do we do? And we get quite a few of these on an annual basis. We have a very specific policy that we walk through in those situations. And this policy the outcome is typically a minor modification or some type of retrofit to the street. Speed humps are an outcome. Maybe some type of candles or diverter could be a possible outcome. There's different things we can do. Certainly speed humps the primary one. The second one in this policy discussion is new development. And that's a lot of roads are being designed and constructed by developers every year within ACHD's jurisdiction. And we have policy in place when we're looking at those designs, specifically through subdivision plats primarily. How are those roads being designed in a way where we can avoid the phone call in the future that we have to then go in and retrofit something? This is primarily new infrastructure, and the policy there, I think, is pretty good. In my talks with staff, I think there's some more tools maybe that could be employed in that situation. But we don't get, as new developments go in, we're not getting a ton of feedback that there's major problems, but there are certainly some situations out there. The third one, which is probably the most broad and complicated, would be how we deal with speed management at the project level. And when I say project level, that could be any size project really, but think about major arterial and collector, projects, community programs. There's lots of examples of major projects where we've gone in, and it's more than just a minor modification. It's more of a substantial modification to the road. I would use examples like Kootenai, what we did on 13th Street, and other projects like that, future projects like Collister, and others where certainly speed management is part of the conversation as we develop those projects, but they end up being typically more expensive and combined with other efforts like the addition of sidewalk or maybe a major maintenance project. So staff's kind of proposal to the commission today, as we walk through speed management and this conversation, is to essentially take a phased approach. I think trying to bite off 1, 2, and 3 all at the same time, it's not impossible. I think it would be a large conversation. There'd be some overlap, but some of the issues are pretty distinct that we deal with in each of those different categories. And so I think for the purposes of this kind of process that we're walking through, staff would like to start with number 1. We think that's where we get the most, I would say, concerns from the public. I think number 2 and number 3, not to say that there aren't concerns, but I think we have some pretty good methods in place to deal with that. Number 1 is a policy that we get a lot of feedback on, and there's some specific aspects of that policy that I think are worth discussing. So that's kind of the staff approach, would be kind of discuss each of these individually over a series of work sessions, focusing first on the traffic management policy as it stands. With that, I'm going to pause. And say, is that approach acceptable to the commission? Does that meet the needs you have? And I'll just pause there.
Thanks, Justin, for that. I think framing it as those 3 overlapping elements that touch and interfere with speed management was really helpful for us to understand the breadth of what we're talking about here. So, but Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, Justin, something just jumped into my mind as this discussion started, and I think I should probably not ignore it. And that is, as we approach the changing our policies and essentially codifying what we want to do in certain circumstances, that perhaps we consider the use of the word may instead of shall all the time, so that we can give the public and our staff and the commission a little more flexibility to deal with individual situations such as the one that we just heard before this work session started. That's all.
Do you have any preference? I mean, is the approach that Justin outlined?
No, not at all. Not at all. Just to increase our flexibility, and that word always helps.
Commissioner Gold, does that sound good to you?
I think that's great.
Commissioner McKinney?
Yeah, I think that sounds fine. Just to be clear, we're talking about the process now, changing our policy. That's what we're talking about. So yeah, I understand. That sounds fine.
Commissioner Hanson?
Madam President, yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, Justin. My perspective was that we were mostly focusing on one that from the get-go, and that because you're dealing with speed, there was a sort of perception we were taking off more than we can choose. So it's good that it's clarified. We're really talking about how do we deal with existing streets and the areas where, for a variety of reasons, the speeds have not been addressed. They're inappropriate for that context. And the examples such as we just heard about, or another example that the director and I talked to Boise City staff about, where a decision was made to basically change the use of another local road, which will probably lead to speeding. The road itself isn't going to be changed, but it's going to be connected to another road that is going to be an access road to the interstate and to a large arterial, that we have thought through how those changes will impact speeds and volumes on those neighborhood streets. And I think that's really important. I agree with Commissioner Goldthorpe. There should be much more flexibility. That the perception the public has had in the past is that it's too bureaucratic, that when they say we've had chronic speeding on this street, it's a standard cut through, and the old neighborhoods where we have lots of great connectivity, there are streets that have a tendency to be used as cut-throughs. And people who don't live there go zipping through, and that it becomes bureaucratic and overwhelming to a citizen when they say, oh, you have to go out and collect the signatures. It has to be certain length. It has to be a certain, all these various criteria. We sort of throw the policy at them. And that has not been good. But since we've raised this issue, there's been some more flexibility in the way it's approached. And the other is that we have this rapid implementation process, although I'd more likely say it's sort of a soon implementation. It's not really rapid. It's sort of pretty soon we'll try and do something about the issues that you raised without putting a major project in place. Having walked down, I just yesterday walked up and down Rose Hill and pleased with what appears to be going in along Rose Hill is a great example of implementing something that looks like it will address the speeding, and then we can evaluate. So putting the flexible language into the policy that actually reflects what we appear to be doing now or we want to do is really important, so that we don't then leave it up to, you know, as it were, the squeaky wheel. The well-organized neighborhood tends to get their rapid implementation sooner than the least organized neighborhood. So that's what I think that's critical, that there be some consistency in the way that policy reflect what we are actually doing now. We're trying to do with rapid implementation and making the speeds consistent with what the neighborhood, what is appropriate for that neighborhood, 20 miles, 25 miles an hour, design speed for that.
Thanks, Commissioner Hanson. Justin?
Well, thank you, commissioners, for the feedback. Really appreciate it. I think we're going to actually touch a little bit more today on some of the discussion. We wanted to make today a touch point and maybe some progress also. So I'm going to go on.
Thank you.
So with that in mind, this is phase one of the approach, which would be a close look and a review of the residential traffic management policy here at ACHD. This is 5104. I think I said 0.3 earlier, it's 0.2. And once again, these are primarily those modifications and retrofits to existing neighborhoods. So just to walk through kind of what the current policy, how it's framed, I think that's important to set the stage there, and then we can go into some of the concerns that have been raised not only by the commission, but by others, citizens certainly, as we go through this. This is primarily a citizen request process. And that's, I think, one of the key foundational elements of this whole discussion is the purpose of this policy is to give staff a way to respond to citizen requests related to speeding or excessive volume on their local street. That's kind of the purpose of this. These are primarily residential neighborhoods. It's rare that we get requests on commercial streets. It's really kind of where you live and where you walk with your dog and your family, things like that. The framework is pretty clear in our current policy. It is it has a lot of steps to it on how we approach this. One of the foundational elements is a traffic safety investigation. And this is where we actually go out to the roadway. We place a device on the road. Most of you have probably seen these, where we call it a tube counter. It has the ability not only to count the cars, but there are certain types of those that can actually calculate speed also when you do a dual tube. They're about 3 feet apart. And the counter gives us the ability to get the data of how fast are people going? These counters are out there for a period of time, so we take averages. How fast are people going? How many cars are going on the road? It's pretty good data to have. I think this idea of having data remains a foundational principle of this whole process. It's good to know what's going on out there. From there, you move into the different processes of eligibility. That's where you have as we discussed, street length, speed and volume, thresholds, and things like that. So there's a clear eligibility criteria. The current process does have a neighborhood participation element. Currently, that element is a petition. that is required to be driven or led by a citizen or group of citizens who live along the street or adjacent to the street of interest, and they're required to gather support essentially for the traffic calming. And then we have procedures in place once we get through all of that. There are various options that we can implement for traffic calming, but I'll be very transparent. The most typical solution that we identify that has the most impact and effect is speed humps. That's the largest implementation category that we have. That being said, I think it's also good to kind of describe what's going on out there. Over between January 2021 and June 2023, here's some statistics. So we evaluated 140 local streets, and those evaluations come from specific requests, and we evaluated 58 collector streets. I'll walk you through kind of how this works. Under the current policy and criteria, of the local streets, you had 4 that qualified on speed, 19 that qualified on volume. Some of them qualified on speed and volume, which is why the number 21 is less than 19 plus 4. So 21 out of the 140 qualified for the neighborhood petition process. So if they don't qualify under the current speed or volume criteria, we don't even offer them the process of neighborhood petition because they don't meet the criteria of speeding. And so that's how it's set up. Of the 21 that did qualify. Oh,
Justin, really
yes,
quick question.
Commissioner.
And can you give us the time? Like, so this is 140 this year or?
Between January
Oh, sorry, there it is.
2021 and June 2023,
you.
so a couple years, Commissioner, that we have here. There are other requests that come in that we may not even perform an evaluation if it doesn't meet the basic eligibility criteria, like a local street or a collector street. If they're asking for an arterial, we typically don't look at those. They're treated a little differently. So this is kind of walking through. So of those 21 that qualified, you have 4 that were able to successfully complete the actual neighborhood petition process. And then once that happens, all of those devices, we actually had a big package this year in 2024. The commission approved us to go out and do many streets. And so we put out a lot of speed humps this year in a big package. Collector streets, a little bit different. You can see speed and volume qualification, the overall 27 of 58. So a higher percentage of collector streets typically qualified based on those criteria, but only 1 out of those 27 was able to successfully complete the neighborhood petition process. And 6 of those were passed along to planning, and then those devices of that 1 were installed in 2024. What happens on some of the collector streets, we'll do the evaluation, and sometimes looking at what the potential solutions are, it gets passed over to planning to go perform a concept study and go through like a Collist or Taft process, where we just realize very early on that a deeper dive is needed than just a petition, and the design solutions are going to be much more substantial. So you can see from evaluation to actual qualification all the way through the neighborhood petition process, it's a relatively low percentage of requests that end up with a device installed.
Madam President,
Commissioner McKinney?
Justin, if we could stay here for just a second. So you mentioned that, well, and I don't know if I just didn't hear you correctly or if there's more to the story, why so few of those that qualify for the neighborhood petition process don't follow through. Is it because residents see the options and decide we don't like any of these options? Or is it because the process is just then too complicated? What are the main reasons that this doesn't happen?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, I think there's several reasons, and I don't know if staff can really say exactly why. But of the reasons, I think one of them is certainly we will tell citizens that they qualify, but they have to seek and go through the petition process. And I think at that point, many of them just say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go knock on doors of my neighbors. I don't want to go collect signatures. That's just a high bar. Maybe they're unwilling to do so. Maybe they're unable to do so. And they just kind of say, okay, I'm done with this process. I think there are times when the citizen goes out, begins to go talk to their neighbors and finds that maybe their neighbors aren't as passionate about this as they are. And so then they essentially drop out of the process with a feeling that they weren't able to get enough signatures for qualification. And I'm going to get into the specifics on the bar we set for qualification. It's relatively high at 75% of the adjacent neighbors have to essentially agree. So to get to 75%, it's a high bar. And I think that bar has been difficult mostly for people to qualify for.
Commissioner Goldberg.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that because what I've experienced from my more distant view the last 10 years is that a number of people come to us and just say, all of my neighbors want this. And when it turns out that we ask them to get a petition signed, it's more like none of the neighbors really want this but me. And we just had one in my district just in the last 2 weeks where we went through this whole process and we put speed lumps or speed bumps down on Bot Lane.
Mhm.
And you may have seen this email interchange because I was involved. And someone I know very well decided he wanted to represent his neighborhood all by himself and force us to remove those. And it ain't gonna work because of this process and the fact that it did work. And so there's two sides to this, two edges to the sword. But I know we've made things quite a bit easier on the neighborhoods to prove the need or the desire. And when we set out those 2 tubes and the whole bit, we make it easier for us to not have to do a petition if all of a sudden it says, oh yeah, the speed limit is 20 and they're going 31. Okay, maybe we should do this, and we do it. So I just, all of a sudden, that example of somebody wanting to represent their whole neighborhood without getting their neighborhood's permission just popped into my mind.
Yeah, Madam President,
Yeah, Commissioner Hanson.
yeah, there's a factor in the areas I represent that is pretty significant, and that is people don't necessarily know their neighbors if they live in an area where there's a lot of rentals and there's a lot of rental units. So that it's a rather daunting task. They're renting, they have kids, but the whole idea is they don't necessarily know their neighbors. And so it's a daunting task to have to go up and down the street. Whereas a neighborhood that is well organized, Kootenai was a great example, a highly organized Depot Bench neighborhood. They all knew each other. It was not difficult at all to get half a dozen people to go up and down, collect signatures, and they got it done. So it really varies from neighborhood to neighborhood. And I think the determination of whether we look at a street as safe or not safe shouldn't be dependent on whether someone volunteers can go out and collect signatures.
And I want to just clarify too, it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, it's collecting 75% in favor of the homeowners that live along that roadway. It's not even inhabitants of those homes, which also poses a problem. Right, and that's a barrier, massive barrier.
Yeah, Madam President, yes, we focus on the homeowner, but there's different ways to look at that, and it's hard to tell sometimes exactly how
So our
that
current
works. But
policy
yeah,
is centered on that, so.
correct.
Okay.
So there's different ways to look at this data and interpret it. Certainly, as I stated, the way the current policy is formulated, you don't end up with a high percentage of evaluations ending up in a device installed for various different reasons. So to dive in on some of the policy concerns that have already been discussed, and I think some of the areas that staff will do a deep dive on and provide some potential recommendations. The thresholds of speed and volume that when we collect the data, certainly something to look at. And we'll take a look at those very carefully. What we hear essentially from the public is concern that the data collected through that speed and volume study doesn't match their experience, and that's hard to judge, right? And someone's view of how fast someone's traveling is somewhat subjective. And I think there are times when people assume that there's people going 50 miles an hour all the time down their street, and it's not really true when we go out and we do the data collection. That doesn't mean there's not some speeding, but it may not be as excessive or as much as they perceive. So those thresholds do matter. I think it's important to have some thresholds to provide staff with guidance on how to proceed. Lacking thresholds and placing the decision fully on staff to make these calls, it's difficult because there's a lot of subjectivity that goes into that, and staff needs guidance. Now, if the commission is interested in, having thresholds that are easier to achieve, then, you can kind of tweak that and say, okay, if you know what you're getting from the current policy thresholds, if you want more to qualify, the idea is to lower the thresholds and you're going to get more qualify. If you're satisfied with the current thresholds, then they stay the same. But we'll bring back some ideas and options there, and working with the staff who have a lot of good information on this. The petition process. This is probably where we get the most negative feedback and concern from the community. It is a burden to place this on a citizen or group of citizens to go out and reach out to their neighbors. I've looked at other communities. A lot of communities approach this differently. One thing that's emerging, though, is the use of technology and some sort of facilitated process by the municipality or government agency to help, to help through this. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I did want to highlight our current petition requirement and support threshold is 75%. It's a pretty high bar. And as you can see, you see the outcome of that with the policy.
Madam President?
Commissioner Hanson.
Yeah, there's three aspects that I think there are concerns that aren't hit on. One is that the travel lane width. Those roads that have travel lanes that are pretty close to 12 feet or more, they may have sidewalks, they may not have sidewalks, they have parking. But if the travel lanes are already wide, that is a factor, a significant factor. The vertical elements.
Commissioner Hanson, I don't want us to get into like treatments and things
No,
like that. I want us to focus.
But
on the
those are
policy concerns.
the absence of those things. If there isn't, if we skip over the things that are, it's like, well, isn't there speeding? So part of the criteria should be how wide are the existing lanes? How much vertical element is there, and how visible are pedestrians? Those three things need to be of the initial evaluation when we get a concern. If we don't look at those things, then so that's why I think it's important that we look at that, because the experience I've had in those neighborhoods where we haven't done anything is, yeah, there's some speeding. It's just, but it's not, it doesn't feel safe. So people often portray or convey their concern about speeding because it's not safe. Drivers coming through because they feel like they're just, they don't see them. There isn't the vertical element, and the lanes are already too wide.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
One policy change I think that might make things happen quicker and probably be more meaningful to the public could be, I mean, I don't mind that 75% at all. But what I do mind is that it's 75% of property owners. I think it should be 75% of the residents.
Go ahead and continue, Justin.
Got it. So the last point on this one was kind of related to communication surrounding the policy, confusion about the process, how to qualify, and then I think a key element also is coordination with the cities, our law enforcement partners, neighborhoods, and how the communication occurs when we're doing these studies and with the outcomes. So with that stated, staff historically and also recently, we've looked at a lot of different policies out there when it comes to the traffic calming process or speed management. And I want to be very clear that ACHD's policy needs to be unique to our agency and our jurisdiction. And when staff brings forward this type of analysis or background information, we're not trying to propose that we need to do it somehow, some way someone else is doing it. It just helps us kind of get a feel for the practice and what's happening out there. And also kind of get a touch point on, is our policy way out of line with what's generally happening? Is it in line? And look at also, and I put this graphic up here, not because I want you to go through the specifics, but I thought it was a nice infographic, something that could be posted on a website that kind of shows the policy simplified in a way that people can understand it. And so I'm not promoting this policy. I just thought the graphic was an interesting example of what we could pursue potentially. But there's a lot going on in this space out in different communities across the United States for sure.
Yeah, I thank you for that statement, Justin, because I totally agree, right? We need to come up with something that works for our communities, but take lessons learned from others, right? And I also applaud you putting this graphic up, because I think one of the bigger challenges as well is our ability to communicate that process to the public, which again, like, it just feels so insurmountable, really. Setting them the policy and expect them to understand what the 85th percentile means and all of those things. And just looking at this, like, this is used they're using really great language and it's pretty concise. And yeah, I think this should be kind of a guide into what we should arrive at. I think in terms of whatever policy we decide on, we can at least clearly communicate what that is and your options.
Thank you, Commission President. And that's the intention. So as we went through all this and we reviewed our current policy, I think there are some key principles, and I want to pause here and make sure that the commission agrees with these principles, because as staff goes through the policy update, it's these principles that are going to kind of help guide our efforts. The idea of a data-driven and fact-based policy, we think it's really important at the staff level. It does give us clear ability to give the community, here's your question. We actually went out and looked at it. Here's the data that we collected. And they can disagree with the data. They can say you didn't collect it at the right time. And we can have feedback and talk about that. But at least it gives us something to talk about, rather than they're just speeding on my street and we have no ability to even gauge what that means. So that's the purpose of that statement. I think clear eligibility criteria is important. Now, we can tweak those criteria to meet commission intent, but having some eligibility criteria, I think, is critical because it helps staff keep the process moving. Staff is very supportive of some level of support from residents adjacent to the street. Now, to what extent do we go after that support, I think, is a good question. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But we think it's important. If you have a single resident who goes after traffic calming, even if it qualifies and we were to just go install something, this can create some neighborhood contention sometimes. These devices, as you know, Commissioner Goldthorpe, and we get feedback on both sides of this, and I think all commissioners have seen that. I think there needs to be some level of support. Now, how we do that, I think, is up for discussion, but I think it's important as a foundational principle of the conversation. Predictability for staff and the public, I think, is really important. And then I do think we need to be sensitive to staff capacity and resources. We have a small team that performs these tasks and investigations. It's a pretty high workload, and we don't want to create a policy, at least in staff's opinion, that requires, do we want to hire more people to do this? Do we want to try and manage this with this personnel that we have? I think staff's take on this would be, we're going to try and bring you back a policy that is hopefully manageable with the personnel that we have. And if the commission wants to go in a direction beyond that, we'll just give you that feedback that we believe that the desires of the commission are going to essentially maybe equate to more staff. And that's a conversation. Ultimately, that would be up to the commission. But our initial take will be trying to match kind of what we have from a staff capacity level.
And Justin, I appreciate that, because I think sometimes we have to wrestle with as a commission, right? What is what the public expects and wants, but then also operationally, like, what type of workload can we actually plan for and support of what the public is asking for? So I think keeping us informed about the workload of the various policy levers is important for us to consider throughout this process.
That would be our intent.
Yeah, great.
So with all this being stated, I got more here and I took some notes, but this is where kind of we started with, and this probably doesn't capture everything, but it's at least a start. This is where staff will be kind of doing this policy review focus. The speed and volume thresholds, I think we're going to take a close look at that, compare to national best practices, but also we want to maintain clear direction for staff, and we'll bring back some ideas and thoughts related to that to the commission. The second one is I think one of the bigger policy changes that we're looking at, which is pursue an ACHD facilitated outreach process. With new technology, I think we can potentially manage this without too much strife for staff. Probably a postcard with a QR code to the actual home or residents along the street, encouraging them to participate in some type of outreach process, whether it's a straight up vote, whether it's more general public outreach. I think we need to work through that. But I think this idea of ACHD, essentially, if you go through the process, you qualify based on the speed or volume thresholds. We're not then saying, oh, now it's up to you, go do the petition. We're going to say, okay, next step, we will facilitate the petition or outreach process. I think that's probably 80% of the concern we get right now from the neighbors. And so that would be a significant policy change that will, I think, likely have a real positive outcome for those that engage with us on this topic. On that note, our current support rate is 75%. And if we want to maintain some sort of measurement of support, which I think staff is probably going to be a proponent of, then it becomes a question of threshold. And is it 75%? Do we lower it to 60%? Maybe it's 66%, a supermajority. I mean, there's different ways to look at this. In previous conversations with the commission, that 60% threshold was kind of thrown around. I think staff is comfortable with that. But I'll put that on your plate, something to think about. Don't have to make a decision today, but at some point, there's likely going to be a need to kind of coalesce around, okay, this is the percentage support that we want. The other thing I want to bring up today, and this is where it gets, a little nuancy, is response rate. And you can have the 60% support threshold and just essentially ignore response rate because you have to get, let's say there's 100 neighbors on that road, you got to get at least 60% to qualify for the next step of potentially installing something. If you get into a response rate question, it's a little different where you say, okay, there's 100 neighbors along the street. Do we want to have a response rate threshold of 75% or 80%? And then of those that responded, another threshold for support. And it's a little complicated. I think staff's always going to lean towards the simpler solution, which is commission, choose your support rate, set it, and just move on, because when you get into the response rate, it does create probably more confusion for the neighborhoods.
Commissioner Coulter.
What you just said, because if we reduce things down to property, from taking away from property owners to residents and down to 60%, I don't want our staff knocking on doors. The residents need to take this by the horns.
Madam President?
Commissioner McKinney.
Yeah, Justin, I like the idea generally, and I wonder, and I noticed the example you showed from Washington County, Oregon. They required a 67%, so 2/3. And frankly, I think that kind of a supermajority makes sense because if you have a traffic calming question in a neighborhood and there's not, more than just a mere majority of support for it, then, like you say, that could be the kind of thing that engenders neighborhood conflict, which is not something that we want to get into as a highway district. But it strikes me that, yeah, perhaps the 75 is a little too high of a bar. I think a 2/3 majority makes sense. It's still a super majority so that you can say, hey, these neighbors are overwhelmingly in favor of it. I like the idea of focusing on residents rather than property owners. Yeah, I agree with your comments about the response rate. That starts making it too complicated. But here's one thought that might help, and that is, well, maybe it'll help. I don't know. If ordinarily these things are instigated by a particular resident along the street, if we have then the ACHD facilitated outreach process, it can even still reach a point where it isn't able to get enough responses. Perhaps the policy could be that following that, the property owner or the resident who initiated the process, they don't have to knock on everyone's doors. They might just have to go after enough people that our process doesn't reach. And that way the burden is smaller. They don't have to reach everyone. They just have to maybe fill in the gaps. If we get a 55% response, and, then this person who's motivated to do something seems to me, contacting another 10 or 15 residents is not as high a bar as, contacting 60 or 70, for example. Anyway, that's something to consider. Just a thought that came to mind, and I think
That's a good idea.
it makes sense. And here's another possibility. As we go toward making these types of changes, perhaps without making the whole set of changes, we could, as a trial run, so to speak, or a test case, try out the new facilitated outreach process under the current standards, and see how much help that by itself adds to the situation. Maybe that's a possibility as like a what's a test case or trial run.
Yeah,
Commissioners, thanks.
Commissioner
Madam
Hanson?
President? Yeah, I just, it's still unclear at what point some data will be used. And another point, is it, well, if it doesn't qualify, we're not going to collect this other data. So when we're saying this has to be data driven, I totally agree. So a piece of data, for example, that we collected on Rose Hill was extraordinary number of unused parking spots, which added to the perception that it was a nice wide road that you could speed on. And kids didn't feel safe. The sidewalks are attached. So is that a piece of data that we wait for if it qualifies or not? Unused parking, and that unused parking has been in our determination on all of the street improvements that we've made. The second is one way or not one way. It seems to me a one-way street, and there's not that many of them, but there's a few that go into neighborhoods. That's a very different street. That there should be that's a piece of data that's really critical regarding safety and the potential for speeding and the risk to pedestrians. And like I said earlier, the presence of vertical elements and the visibility of pedestrians. Are there curb extensions already so kids are visible, or are they hidden behind cars and further back so that they're not visible? That kind of data, it seems to me, isn't difficult to collect in terms of determining qualification in the forefront, rather than wait and say, well, it doesn't qualify, therefore we're not going to bother to collect this information. So that needs to be clarified.
President Pickering, members of the commission, Commissioner Hanson, thank you. I think, staff's, basic response to that is, the more variables we add in the data collection process, the more complicated the data collection process becomes. And I in no way am stating that the variables you're describing, Commissioner Hanson, aren't relevant. I think the way we know if the street characteristics and design are not working is by collecting the speed and volume data and determining if indeed speeding exists. And I think there may be some overlap with this conversation and the concept design conversation on larger streets like Taft and others, where I think the tree inventories and parking analysis and all of those things that we do on the larger concept designs, those become really critical variables as we work with those neighborhoods. But to be honest, if we were to go down that road, I think on this policy, that's where I start to kind of get my feelers up on, yeah, I don't know if we have the staff to go out and perform a proper parking analysis. You need staff out there in the mornings, during the day, in the evenings, on weekends, and it creates, I think, a higher burden. And in the end, I don't know if that data ultimately helps us. As long as we have that speed and volume data, I think we have a good place to start. That's just my impression, but ultimately we're glad to walk through that deeper as we provide the policy language. So I think that was really a good conversation on the response rate and the support level. I think that'll be one of the key areas where the commission will need to coalesce and provide staff clear direction. We'll probably bring a proposal and then in policy language, and then the commission can respond at that time, whether you want to up it, lower it, certainly that's up to you. I do feel, though, from a general consensus today that getting too wrapped up on response rate is probably not the way to go, and just keep it as simple support rate from the percentage of neighbors that live along the corridor. Got it. Okay. Streamlining and simplifying the overall policy, I think, is just a general principle that we want to pursue. I do think, as I showed some examples today, that staff, these won't be codified within policy, but we want to create some kind of parallel documents that mirror the policy in a way that they could be handed out, posted on our website, something like that. I think is we're willing to work with Shandy's team on that. I just throw her under the bus because she's going to end up doing it. So, but we'll, as
She's
we
up
get
for the task, I'm sure.
as we get through the policy and lock it down a little bit, we can then hand it over and create those documents. Website updates and notifications to city and neighborhoods, we'll manage that also. I think that's an important part of this. But overall, the idea is to streamline and simplify and not create requirements within the policy that make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Well, and Justin, I would, in this, along with obviously presenting a policy proposal and those accompanying documents, before as you're kind of going through this and that research, I've talked to the 3 of the mayors that that overlap my district in particular, and each of them have been very direct with me about, hey, I've gotten a constituent, which I appreciate you talking about, chatting with the city, and how do we communicate with our city partners about these requests, or how do they, engage us, vice versa. And I think it would be good for staff to have those conversations with each of the mayors or their staff around how would they like to be informed about these requests. Because I've had all 3 out of the 6 to be like, we've got this issue, we want to be informed, or, hey, how can I help usher this progress along? Because we're sharing constituents, right, that have those same concerns. So
thank you, President Pickering and commissioners. Absolutely. And there's some of this where we'll have the policy, which kind of guides us through it. And then there's kind of commission direction and practice of how we communicate. How much of that we want to codify within the policy.
No, that's a supplemental thing.
Agreed,
I think
agreed.
it would be helpful to know what a consensus looks like, if there is any consensus. And so that way we can be sure that we're on the same page as we're engaging with those other electeds.
Perfect. Well, I think that plays right into the next steps.
Fabulous.
Staff coming up at your meeting on October 9th, we'd like to go ahead and bring a revised policy for your review. This would be available to you before the meeting for your kind of processing and thoughts. We'll do our best to meet those guidelines that we have today, but this is kind of the working draft discussion where we expect changes and feedback and maybe a deep dive on some of the thresholds that are there. Staff will go ahead and put in maybe our thoughts as recommendations to the commission related to thresholds and things like that, but certainly the commission weighs in and clearly makes the final call on whatever those decisions are. We would then, after that, go ahead and make any edits, and if there's consensus, prepare a draft for public review. And I think this would give us a good opportunity to then, during that public review phase, talk to the cities, send it out, get as much feedback as we can. We could share it through social media, through the neighborhood associations, and see how it's reacted to. And that public review would take place October 24th through essentially through November 20th. And then after that, maybe make any final edits and bring it back to the commission for an adoption on December 11th. Typically, you don't have that many meetings in December, so this is a pretty aggressive schedule. I think if it's just if there's rapid consensus and everyone gets on board, we can probably make this schedule. If there's a need for a deeper dive on any specific issues, it may elongate this, but we want to get it right. Staff is committed to work with the commission on this and bring it back as quickly or as provide whatever process the commission wants to pursue.
Justin, quick question. So do you have an additional timeline as to when you're going to be sharing out this draft with our advisory committees, for example?
I think our intent would be during that public review process between October and November would be then distributed to the advisory committees during that time. This is pretty condensed, and so it would be kind of a broad outreach process to everybody at the same time and then to bring back. And if there's specific feedback from any specific advisory committee that the commission wants, we can have potentially they may choose to send a letter or however that process goes for each advisory committee.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, one kind of a corollary topic that goes right along with this and is, and we brought it up a little bit earlier, is our relationship with law enforcement. And I just wanted to let you know of an experience without being too specific that I just had in the last 30 days. And that was a conversation with a mayor here in the county, not the county itself, but a city that has the authority to issue tickets and keep the revenue generated from those tickets within their own city for their own use. And a thought that I've had for many, many years has been, why don't you just enforce the laws a little better, take those huge fines that they are now and better fund a traffic enforcement section of your police department. And I was so disappointed when this mayor very politely let me know that they were almost $1 million in arrears from the county who collects those fines and then doesn't send them back to the city, except when they want to. And here comes Steve. And because there's got to be a better reason for it than just, okay. I'm glad he wasn't getting up to come up. It happens so often. But anyway, I was so disappointed. I couldn't hardly believe it when he told me how far behind the county was in requiring the courts that collect that money to send it back to the cities so that it could be spent on law enforcement. And it's got to be something political because it doesn't make any sense at all. And politics seldom does. So I don't know, we can talk about this and maybe make an assignment for someone here in the commission to talk to the county commission to find out what's going on. That's all.
Okay. Any other?
Madam President,
Commissioner Hanson?
yeah, that actually Commissioner Goldthorpe makes a good point about working with law enforcement. And we hear about the fatalities and the serious injuries, but we don't get a consistent, regular report back to us. Sort of what was determined. We just had a fatality on in Harris Ranch a couple weeks ago. But I don't know the context because early on when people are most concerned, it's like, this is under investigation. We don't have all the information. So I think we should develop some process that is constantly giving reports back to us, both the police investigation and then our own investigation as to the factors that led to that fatality so that we're understanding the context and a larger view of addressing safety. Most of what we're talking about with speed management is we're not going to see most fatalities do not happen on local roads or even collectors. They're on the arterials. So I would just because of Commissioner Goldthorpe's comments about interacting with the police, I think that's really, really important that we get that data and that we, as the people who are responsible for the safety of the right of way, are constantly informed as to those areas where we've had where we've had issues and what is the substantive evaluation of those. So if there's some process that can get that to us more frequently and regularly, not when we're evaluating policies, but just on a regular basis, that would be really helpful.
Great work session and guiding us through this topic, Justin.
Thanks, commissioners. I'll be back on October 9th.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll see you all next week. Thank you.